Santiago Canyon College is an innovative learning community in Orange, California, with more than 260 certificate and degree programs. Santiago Canyon College is a proud sponsor of community programming and OC World.
OC World is made possible by the generous contributions of Marisla Foundation, Keith and Judy Swain Family Foundation, Wells Fargo Bank, the University of California, Irvine, Orange County Community Foundation, Farmers and Merchants Bank, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ruben Alvarez, guest hosting for OC World. Our guest today is Frank Cruz, author of Straight Out of Barrio Hollywood, a story about his years as an activist and his broadcasting experience. Frank is one of the co-founders of Spanish language news, sports, and entertainment network Telemundo. He is also a former Chicano History Professor and an Anchorman, and the first Latino to be appointed chairman of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Today, he serves as a trustee for the University of Southern California, director for Latino Public Broadcasting, a non-commercial educational and cultural media company. Welcome, Frank. At this part of your life, what is your reflection on your journey?
Well, you know, a lot of things come to mind, especially at my young, ripe old age, right? And I think the significant, that I see in what I've done over the years, I really have had about 4 or 5 different careers, which is sort of unique for the average person. I started out as a junior high school teacher, then began to teach at the university level, then made a complete change of that and went into television as an anchor reporter. And I did that for about 15 years, then left that front of the camera completely to the behind the scenes to start a television station in LA, KVEA, which was the second Spanish language station. And then ultimately we started Telemundo. And then for the final stage of my life, I then, bought an insurance company, and I was in the insurance business as an owner of a underwriter of a major company in the country. So 4 or 5 different careers. People ask me about my life. That was it in about 30 seconds, 4 or 5 different careers.
What particular struggles did you have to overcome?
Well, there are struggles and then there are struggles. Part of the fact was that we were, I should say, wound up being the first in a lot of different entities. I was one of the first Chicano reporters in the LA area with ABC and NBC, and then ultimately, you wind up being the first in a variety of different areas, and that poses a problem for you because people aren't, familiar with what you're trying to do, and you need a lot of guidance, and you run into a lot of hurdles. I'll be very specific. When I started working at Channel 7, ABC Eyewitness News, as one of the first Chicano reporters, I was told cover the Chicano community, but there was some resistance by a lot of the personnel at ABC. They would say, "Why are we covering news out in East LA? That's not part of our audience. Our audience is in West LA." And so you run into issues of, will the assignment editor, will the camera crews that cover East LA now, will they be happy and will they be content? And I got to admit to you, many of them weren't very happy. They saw it as, having to go into areas of the city to cover news in the community of areas that were not on the air. And as a first Chicano reporter, you had the hurdle of bringing them in and covering stories in the Chicano community. That was ABC's responsibility to cover all audiences.
No, that's kind of like the hurdles that you overcame or helped overcome at Lincoln High School during the walkouts. What can you tell us about the 1968 walkouts and your involvement?
Yeah, well, you have to look at the 1960s and 70s as highly activist civil rights movement in this country. It was a major point in American history. You had the Civil Rights Act, you had the Voting Rights Act, you had an Immigration Act, you had the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, and a myriad of other events. The civil rights period of that time brought a lot of activity and a lot of different groups, Asian Americans, Chicanos, African Americans, and Native Americans, if you will, asking for their right positioning in society, asking for equality, asking for openings, and so forth. And I think with me and others at Lincoln High School at the time in 1968, there was an enormous amount of tension regarding that. And I think the kids wanted equality, they wanted to be represented in the classrooms and so forth, not only with teachers, but with counselors and guidance and so forth. Just to give you a very concrete example, 8th graders and 11th graders throughout this country are taught social studies at those 2 years of schooling. One of the books that is classically used for 11th graders talks about a variety of chapters as to the founding of the nation and so forth. But they have big sections in those books on immigration and its role to America. They talk about Jewish immigration, Irish immigration, Italian immigration, German immigration to America. And here I was teaching 11th graders at Lincoln. And I said, my gosh, 99.9% of them looked like me. There were Mexican American kids, and there was nothing in those textbooks that mentioned them. So I, decided to do something about it and talked to a mentor of mine at East LA College, Dr. Helen Miller Bailey. And I said, Doc, I says, is there a textbook that I can use with these kids about Mexican immigration in the United States? She says, there isn't at that level, she said. And then she challenged me and said, let's do it. And we did. We put a textbook together, Latin Americans, Past and Present, we called it, where I included chapters as to how these Mexican American kids and how their parents, first of all, the Mexican War impact and all of
the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. And all the impact that it had, and what brought their parents. There's push and pull factors that bring Mexicans to this country. We open up the gates when we need them.
Yeah, well, the Bracero program.
Right, and many, many others. Yeah. But at Lincoln High School, much of that sort of surfaced right to the top. And I think it was brought on and inspired by the civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s.
Now, that textbook was only used in your classroom, or was it adopted across the district?
It was adopted. We got Houghton Mifflin Publishing Company to do it, and it was done. School districts were able to buy it across the country.
What was that fight like?
Well, yeah, it's difficult because trying to insert a new subject matter and a new curriculum and a new perspective can be difficult at times. I mean, starting Chicano studies departments in the early 60s and early 70s was a difficult period. These departments were created overnight, and Chicano studies professors who were working on their masters and PhDs at different institutions were sort of like a military ramp up. We picked up these professors and created departments. And Cal State Northridge, Cal State LA, UC Systems came in somewhat reluctantly a little bit later on, but the state universities were right on top of it. And those were challenges too, by the way. It wasn't as easy as one would think.
And that's risky.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of risk in all 5 of your careers.
Yeah.
How did you manage it?
Well, I've always had a saying of, I don't like second-class treatment.
Okay.
and I always pushed and pushed for us to, do well and to excel in those areas. But risk-taking has always been part of my DNA. I try things, and I, look for opportunities to do it, and that, that's what motivates me. I've got a lot of curiosity, and a lot of it stems, I think, from the way my mom raised me. I didn't have a dad. My dad passed away before I was born. My mom was 6 months pregnant with me, but she was mom and dad, and she raised us, to not to be second-class, citizens, and to fight for everything we could get.
So you were planning to become a dentist at one point?
Yeah, at one point, yeah. When I got out of the Air Force, my last base was up at Oxnard Air Force Base, and then got out, and I went to live with my aunt in East LA. And one of the dentists that I went to while I was in college so happened to be a Chicano doctor, a Chicano dentist. Leonel Ballesteros is his name. And Leonel, I told him I had an interest in, perhaps, and he began to push me into dentistry. And I like zoology, I like biology, I like physics, but organic chemistry was my downfall. And in all due respect to chemists and what have you, it just didn't ring a bell with me. And at about the same time, all of that activism that I spoke about a few minutes ago, civil rights activism and so forth, it got me interested, and Dr. Helen Miller Bailey at East LA College was the mentor that made me lean in the direction of history, and I've been a historian ever since.
Now, you're the founder of Telemundo, decades ahead of your time. What were the challenges and obstacles that you had to overcome?
Well, Telemundo, I had been at NBC now about 10 years, and this friend of mine, Manny Sanchez, says to me, Frank, he says, we're going to a meeting today at about 2 o'clock, but there's a gentleman that I'd like you to meet over in Beverly Hills. Let's go have lunch with him, and then we'll go. And my eyes were wide open, and I had been with ABC for 5 years, NBC 10, 15 years on the English side of the camera. And I met this man, and he kept saying, given the size of the demographics of the Hispanic population, especially in the Southern California area, he said, this city could really take another television station. And I said,
not only KMEX.
Yeah, not only KMEX, they were the only ones. He says, but there's enough of a basis for demographic-wise in terms of numbers to merit another station. So long story short, we went out and purchased a station that had been dormant in the LA area, called it KVEA, had great success with it. We were able to get great ratings, and after a year, the parent corporation that had initially loaned us the money said, well, how do we do a network? And we said, well, you can buy stations across the country, but that takes time. They said, well, how do you do it rapidly? I said, you can buy them. And so we went out and bought the John Blair Company that had a station in Texas, one in Miami, one in Puerto Rico, and then we picked up one in WNJU in New York, and then got one in Chicago, and we had the nucleus of the Hispanic market, and 85%.
So overnight you became a network.
It's probably on record one of the fastest trips ever to starting with the network and getting it on the air in a year span time, which was,
And now it's one of the most popular.
Now it's,
worldwide.
Well, of course, now it's owned by Comcast, a giant communications company in this country.
Now, what were your major accomplishments at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting? Now, that was quite a coup for you, and it is a tremendous organization.
Yeah.
Number one, it funds the national PBS movement, correct?
And NPR, right?
Yes, and NPR.
Well, I was nominated to be on the board of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting by President Clinton. you still have to be approved by the Senate. So I had to go through hearings with Senator John McCain's committee in charge of it at the time. The public broadcasting is really, it's a gift to the American people in the sense that its creation really came from the fact that the country was concerned at the time, in the early days of the creation, 67,
Right.
late 60s, early 70s, concerned about the sort of negative things of commercial television, that it was perhaps poisoning our kids and it wasn't being helpful. One could say the same thing now about the internet and all the other stuff. But in those days, they needed an alternative, and the alternative was to create a public television station. There were many colleges and universities at the time across the country that already had an educational TV station. But the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, signed by Lyndon Johnson, brought all the television stations together. And then the following year, that led to then the creation of National Public Radio. So CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, takes your taxpayers' dollars, if you will, and then funds roughly 300 some odd public broadcasting stations across the country and 700 some odd public radio stations across. So it's a major one. So I got on the board, and then I was selected to be the chairman of the corporation. And
The first Latino.
the first minority person ever
Okay.
to chair public broadcasting. And this is why it's important that we be in positions to represent. I was sitting at home, at my home here in Laguna Niguel, having a cup of coffee, reading the newspaper. And I saw a section in the calendar that said that the first drama put together by Latinos or for Latino audiences had been put together by CBS and Les Moonves. Les Moonves, the head of CBS, I had met Les from another board that we had been on. I picked up the phone and I said, Les, I see you guys are not going to carry this pilot that you shot on American Family, that you called it. It would be the first Latino, Latin American drama in the United States on commercial television. And he said to me, yeah, Frank, he says, somebody back east decided that they wanted other dramas for CBS, and that one is done there. I said, may I have a chance at it? I was there at CPB at the time. And he said, yeah, go for it. So I immediately picked up the phone, told the executive director of CPB, and to get a hold of the head of PBS, Mitchell, in DC also, and I just tell them about the series. So CPB provided 15 million funding for it. PBS provided the same thing for the first Latino American drama on television ever. And it's a great story. Eddie Olmos plays a role in it.
What was the name of it again?
American Family.
American Family.
Yeah, it was the first Latino drama ever on television, commercial or public, and we put it on public television.
And I remember people being glued to the television to
Right.
see the next episode.
Now, back to your original point, what is it that I did? Had it not been for a Latino sitting there in charge of CPB, that would never have happened.
So it's important to represent.
It's important there because you have that eye and you watch for things like that. And I also did it with Maya and Miguel, two shows dedicated to kids, teaching them language and arts and so forth bilingually. And it's been very, very successful on PBS, Maya and Miguel. It would never have gotten off the air had it not been for the fact that Frank Cruz was chair of CPB. He is Hispanic, Mexican-American, and interested in that type of programming, and that's what got done.
And now it's a classic.
And it's there, it's permanently on the air almost.
Absolutely. How do you see the Latino world developing in the 21st century?
Well, you know, I come from the era that was very much involved in the social movement of the civil rights era. It opened up a lot of doors, and it created opportunities, And I think the country was ready. As I mentioned earlier, there were a myriad of different entities that were involved. Native Americans, Asian Americans, blacks, Hispanics, all of those entities asking for equality and for equal rights and for position. It has been opened, but sometimes I fear that we may be wanting to hold back on some of that.
For example?
And not let the growth go. Well, you know, when I hear politicians say that maybe we don't want to teach about culturally different people in this country, let's not contaminate the curriculum and subject matter by having to inject African American studies or Chicano studies and so forth. I'm concerned. We went through a very exciting period of the 60s and the 70s, 80s, and it opened up a lot of doors. And I'm fearful. I'd hate to see elements come in to try to hold back that subject matter or not wanting to include it as part of the curriculum at any level of education. And I think, you know, we need to make sure that we present that kind of history and that curriculum includes all of the different people that have played a role in the significance of this country. And I think for Chicanos, which has been my drive and my dream all my life, is to make sure that we are mentioned and our accomplishments and our deeds and so forth are there.
And how do you suggest that we go about that?
When I first was involved in the creation of Chicano Studies, I was hopeful that there would be a lot of students that would go through there, get degrees and so forth. And I think we're at a phase now where people are saying, Frank, they'll tell me, a lot has been written about the farm workers movement, a lot has been written about the Chicano movement, and they say, what we now need are the stories of those the individuals that were involved in leading those things. Chavez and Castro and on, Bert Corona, on, and those leaders and so forth. We now need their biographies and their backgrounds to say, who were they? Who were the leaders that were involved in the farm workers movement or in the Chicano movement in the urban settings of America? And I think that's what needs to be written. And I'm optimistic when I see good scholarly work, and I could name you 3 or 4. Natalia Molina, Laura Gomez over at UCLA in law, who write about the issues that have impacted Chicanos in this country through decades and decades. And I think that is the scholarly work that needs to be done now. It's been, we've touched on it in broad brush strokes and approaches. And I think you now need those scholars that have graduated from those Chicano studies departments or from any field of curriculum to write about it and to make sure that it's included.
Just like you have in your particular book that takes it to that level. I mean, because you've been involved with so many different things. And in your book, go ahead and show the book there. It's a winner of the International Latino Book Awards. And it's been out for a while. You can get it on Amazon, but it's a very detailed story of all these fantastic people you've met throughout your lifetime.
Yeah, and I titled it Straight Out of Barrio Hollywood, and there's sort of a reason for it. That is the name of the little barrio that I was born and raised in Tucson, Arizona. But we sort of did a play on words of Frank went from the Barrio Hollywood in Tucson, Arizona, to the real Hollywood in Los Angeles. And that's sort of the play on words that we used on that particular thing.
Which is appropriate.
Yeah. And, but one of the other things that I was sort of reluctant to do it. And it took some convincing and coaxing for me to do it. Rita Sosa, my co-author, who has written other books, she had interviewed me for a book on Dr. Hilton Miller Bailey. She wrote the book, she did the biography on Dr. Bailey. Rita came to me one day and said, Frank, she says, have you ever thought of doing your life? I said, oh, Rita, you do your work, and if it's recognized by others, fine, but you're not out there trumpeting your successes and so forth. And she says, well, I think you should. I said, well, you know, Rita, let me think about it, I told her. And I then started to ask, you know, friends of mine in academia. I said, what do you think? And that's when they then told me, you know, a lot has been written about these movements, minority movements and Chicano, but in a broad brush approach from a total topical standpoint. We now need to see who are the leaders of those particular programs.
And you mentioned a lot of them in your book.
Right, and that's what prompted me. You know, I said to myself as a historian, you know, they're right. Those books need to be written.
Right,
and I think
the stories need to be told.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, because we are very timid in telling our stories because we're told, you know, you're not supposed to brag. Yeah, and
that's true.
And as a culture, I mean, that's always been our
story. If you do well, people will know it. You don't have to worry about blowing your horn and your trumpet. Right, they'll see. But that's not the way it usually works. Yeah,
exactly. But, well, we really appreciate you writing the book. You are just like a treasure to the Latino community. And all of your work stands for that. I mean, like I said, I really like the book. It's like one of those things that you read, and to me, it mirrors a lot in my life. My parents were activists, and all of the barriers that they broke, the barriers I broke as a student and in my career. So I really took it to heart, and it was very motivating for me to keep going.
And, you know, a motivating story is Mendez versus Westminster here in Orange County.
Absolutely.
I mean, I mentioned in my book, but I once had an occasion to talk to Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, and we were at a conference together, you know, speaking and so forth. And I asked her, we were talking about Mendez versus the board. And she said, absolutely. She says, that laid the groundwork for Brown versus the Board of Ed. That brought about integration in this country. She said, you know, and to my absolute surprise, I found out that she was raised right in a farm, in a ranch outside of
Arizona.
Right outside of Tucson, Arizona. And she was fluent in English and Spanish.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I see that our time is up, and I want to thank Frank Cruz for taking the time to talk to us today. It's been an honor and a privilege to bring you Frank's story.
Thanks for having me.